Hello to all of my subscribers, those who are paying and those who are here for free. This is Donald R. Collins coming to you once again from Fool's Gold, Confessions from an Educated Fool. Hey everyone, it's been a while, been a minute. I've been doing a lot of other things around talking about the world of work, finding gig work, trying to promote Spinning Sage's Gold, my latest book, trying to talk about the job search process, among other things. And I'm going to come to you once again around those themes today, specifically around job searches and trying to get paid for the work that you are doing, and so on and so forth. Um, it's been an interesting task trying to deal with the ageism, the elitism, the racism, and sometimes a combination of all three, sometimes two out of three, sometimes just ageism while being on the job market these last couple of years. And it's hard everywhere. And even with someone who has worked in three different fields, interrelated fields to some extent between academia, NGOs in the nonprofit world, and journalism and writing, it's still difficult because all of those fields are tend to be mission oriented, tend to be about skill sets that are considered rather soft, like the ability to write, for example, or an edit, and teach and manage people and deal with social justice issues, among all those other things. Those are considered rather soft skills, hard won skills to be sure, but soft skills where people don't really value your skills as much as you should. Um, and the truth of the matter is, in applying for jobs, I'm talking specifically about writing and columnist and staff writer kinds of jobs with newspapers, with news organizations, with magazines. It's a battle. I can tell you for a fact over the last, say, 2.5 years of looking for work, both when I was teaching at Loyola and while I was writing for Al Jazeera and while being a freelancer and while promoting Spinning Sages Gold and even while driving for Uber, I guess, to supplement my income when I haven't had much income from my writing. I've had more income from my writing this month, thank God. It's been helpful, but it's still stressful. Here's the thing. Every time I apply for any job, if it's been, especially a writing job, if it's been up on LinkedIn, on journalismjobs.com, and anywhere else, if it's been up for more than 24 hours, I guarantee you at least 100 people have applied for the job. And within 3 days, it's probably hundreds of people. Before LinkedIn started just saying more than 100 jobs when they would give you an actual number. I remember once seeing a job that had only been up for 3 days and it had almost 1,500 applications, and that was a writing job, right? So these jobs, if you can get them, are fairly lucrative in some cases, like with The Guardian or with Time Magazine or with The Atlantic. Staff writing positions for those jobs often pay anywhere between $100,000 upwards of $170,000 a year. To put that in perspective, a program officer at the Ford Foundation, for generally speaking, this high level job that oftentimes requires you knowing the people who are going to hire, or at least knowing someone there who wants you there, who can vouch for you. Those jobs basically pay around the same amount of money, right? You think, okay, you're managing, a $10 million portfolio for the Ford Foundation, you get paid anywhere between, say, 145 and 180,000 a year. You write for a magazine or a newspaper, you get paid nearly as much. Maybe that's one of the reasons why journalism is struggling, because maybe on some extent they're overpaying their people, but I'm being facetious because you can't overpay someone who has significant amounts of experience and expertise in what they're writing about. Where when they write a piece and express their opinion, it's an expert level opinion. So you can't really, there's the monetary value to that is probably less than what is probably more than what you're paying the person for anyway. So there's that aspect of things too I'll bring up. But the truth of the matter is it's just been hard. And so Since my struggles with Al Jazeera to get them to pay me when they finally paid me in April, I had already started. I'd been looking for work and for staff writing work, for columnist work, for contributing writing work, for any work I could get as a writer that didn't require me to constantly churn out pitches, right, and doing multiple drafts or something. I applied for a job as I think a politics writer. I don't remember the exact title, but I think politics writer is the right one. At something called the Preamble. They have their own sort of specialized Substack where they publish articles. It's run by a woman by the name of Sharon McMahon. She's supposedly written a best-selling book somewhere out there in the last 5 or 10 years. She's some sort of insider who knows people in the world of Washington politics. And so she decided to start her own startup known as the Preamble, which is supposed to be a combination of history and politics that actually encourages and inspire people and gives them knowledge around what's the inner workings of what's actually been happening behind the scenes under the wannabe autocracy that is the United States and the U.S. government, that sort of thing. And so I applied for a job there sometime in March, I think February and March. I think the job paid 75 to 85 or something like that, or 80 to 90, somewhere in that range, right? And it was mostly remote, so I applied for it. I got rejected for the job, right? But it's just normal. I'm okay with, I mean, I can deal with rejection. It's not a big deal. But then they followed up with me and asked me if I wanted to contribute to their website, and I said sure, why not? I mean, no big deal. They wanted me to give them rates and so on and so forth, and I guess they wanted me to underprice myself, but I decided not to, and I said, well, typically at Al Jazeera I was making $500. Sometimes I've gotten paid as much as $1,000 for a piece. Wasn't lying. It's actually the truth. I've been paid as much as, I've been paid even more than that to talk about pieces. So, so I was giving them, basically my rates, and they were like, okay. And then they said, hey, we want you to write a piece about the GI Bill and its importance today and what's been happening in terms of, taking care of GIs. I think they were thinking about this as an evergreen piece that could be particularly applied for things like Memorial Day or Veterans Day, right? So they said they wanted 1,500 words. The editor for Sharon McMahon, I guess her name's Ashton something or other, wanted me to write said piece. So I sat down and wrote a piece, typically of the pieces that I've written in the 1,500 word range that I've been writing for the last, say, 12, 13 years, right? So talked about the relevance of recent events like the U.S. and its attacks on Iran and its exposure of service members to, death and injury and destruction, and how the GI Bill, as strong as it was when it was first enacted by Congress in 1944, isn't quite as robust in terms of where we are today in 2026 as it was 80 something years ago, right? That's basically what I wrote. I wrote 1,500 words trying to contrast the bill and its history with, the constant, exposure of military service members to the possibility of being maimed or PTSD, being killed. And while some of the benefits there are still good, they're just not as good as they used to be in some ways. And that's all the point I was really trying to make. And I thought that was all the point that they wanted me to make, except that they wanted me to do something completely different. They wanted me to take all of that and turn it into an explainer, but they didn't tell me that that's what they wanted. I guess they assumed that I understood what they wanted, right? But and they wanted me to use Google Docs and share the document with them while I was working on it. And okay, and so I started writing, and the more I started to write, the more I realized that I think they were actually giving me real time edits to do while I was already editing, right? Over the course of one day, I probably went through at least 30 comments. You need to answer this question, you need to answer that question, you need to answer the other question. And so I'm kind of like, well, what do they really want? Do they want me to just write an encyclopedic entry going into granular detail about how a veteran goes about, trying to cash in the GI Bill and how it looked at the time in the 1940s when the only veterans to really benefit from the GI Bill were white guys, right? Is that what they really want me to say? Do you want me to go in that kind of detail? Do you want me to give the history? Do you want me to give the political background? They seem to want everything, but they didn't really have any, like limits or guideposts exactly as to what they wanted. So I just said, okay, I'll try to do the best I could. Yeah, but then at one point they asked me the question, well, exactly how does a veteran go about trying to get their benefits? And I'm thinking to myself, but I literally said in the previous couple of paragraphs that the Veterans Administration would be the point of place that any veteran would go to deal with this. So I wrote in my comments, it's actually pretty simple, really. You go to the, a veteran would go to the VA office in their hometown or in their immediate area, county, wherever it happens to be, and they would fill out a form trying to, as a veteran after the war to get their benefits. And I said, it's quite simple, really. They took that as an insult that I was somehow showing them up by saying that, you know, that to saying all that. So I get this abrupt email while I'm in the middle of doing some of the last revisions to this, what's probably now 2,500 word piece, to tell me that they don't want me anymore, that I've been so disrespectful and all this other stuff. And I was kind of like, what? What? And then, within a couple minutes of that, I lost complete access to the document on top of that. I really felt, that my privacy was violated. I'm a writer. I'm trying to write. I'm trying to do significant revisions for something that you said you wanted, right? While trying to address all your issues. I'm telling you the process is simple because the process really is simple. I'm not telling it because I want to show you up. You don't know what you're talking about, editor. But at the same time, I'm like, no, you don't just get to do that. So I sent an email and I said in so many words, okay, you don't want me to work on this, then fine. But but here's the thing. Y'all didn't seem to know what you wanted. And more importantly, since when do you step in while someone's in the middle of doing edits to actually comment on their editing, to add more stuff for them to do, and then to complain when they're telling you something is simple, right? That's a violation of my privacy as a writer. It's also a violation of my privacy, period. Because what are you doing? Just like I shouldn't be trying to edit while you're commenting on stuff. You shouldn't be commenting on myself while I'm editing. I'm not done, right? And so I said all that, and they said that basically we should that they were gonna, since they killed the article after I started working on it, I had given them an initial draft, so on, that they owed me a kill fee. I have yet to hear from them, even though I've sent 3 emails over the last 2 months to ask them to pay me. And so this is what I really think. I think that they wanted me to do Y, and I did X at first, and then they said, well, we want Y, but we want Y times 5, right? And I was willing to do Y times 2, right? Which is less than they wanted. They just wanted more and more stuff because they weren't sure what they really wanted. And to me, that's a sign of bad editing. It's also a sign of bad management. How dare you step in the middle of someone's editing process and basically get rid of them because you don't like them asking questions. You don't like them making comments that you think are disrespectful when you're just literally saying something as simple as going to a VA's office, right? What the heck is that all about? They have yet to publish the version of the piece that I originally gave them, or the piece that they decided to reject at the last minute, which is fine because technically it's my intellectual property after all. You can have the idea, but if I've written about it, I can publish it on Substack, on Patreon. If I can find the publisher to publish it later on down the line, I can't. But what I can't accept is the fact that they owe me money, right? You said you had a kill fee. You said you needed to pay me X percentage of that. It seems to me you don't have enough money to pay me. And that's the real reason why that you rejected the article in the first place, while drumming up all this, how dare you BS over something that wasn't actually insulting at all, right? But more importantly, it just points to how little any news organization values writers, especially writers who are not on their staff, right? We're a dime a dozen. Anybody can do what we're doing. You're just an essayist. How can you really write about this stuff? And I'm talking about the people who are in the industry. I know that millions of people around the world don't value my writing. I also know that there are plenty of people around the world who do because I hear from them too, right? But I don't know if it's millions, but at least thousands at this point in my life. So at least I can accept that. But there are millions of other people who don't value any writing at all, and it's just a terrible thing to see. This sort of lack of way of putting this viper-like industry where you know just learning today, I applied for a job at The Guardian a couple months ago for the senior writer position in race and inequality. My wife thinks I should have at least been interviewed. I don't know if I should have been interviewed or not, but I found out today that Morgan Jerkins got the job. Morgan Jerkins is qualified in many ways to do the work, so I'm not complaining about that in general. But if you're going to advertise a job, there's no way Morgan Jerkins had to do an interview process. If you've published two fairly successful books like she has about her growing up as a black woman in America and her learning about stuff as a young millennial, borderline zillennial, going around the country learning about um, Gucci culture and learning about, lynching and being able to travel America and telling that to her relatively younger readers, right, compared to the age of some of my readers, right? Then yeah. But the problem is that you advertise a position as if you're going to actually interview people. There is no way that Morgan Jerkins went through an interview process. And if she doesn't go through an interview process, that pretty much says to me that you just advertise a job for no other reason than to put it out there to try to create a process that seemed fair, but obviously wasn't, right? And that's more often how people who become senior writers, editors, senior assistant editors, senior editors, it's always through you could say the old boys network, but it's the old boys and elite people's network, really. And if you're actually applying for a job where they don't know who you are, or at best they know of you, right? There's no way that folks in Guardian, at least certainly in their opinion section anyway, don't know who I am because I write on similar topics and have written on similar topics, not only for them, but for Al Jazeera over the years. But if they don't know you personally, if you're not showing up to their cocktail parties and going to journalism events and I'm nodding with these people, you might as well just be some guy somewhere in the middle of nowhere working and doing this stuff. And that's disconcerting. It's also very discouraging to know that, here I am on the one hand trying to do work that you've asked me to do, and you get mad about about how long it's taking me to do, how much work I'm doing, and how much you have to pay me. So you trump up some excuse to not pay me for said work, and go and act as if you're throwing me a bone. When the truth of the matter is, you're not throwing me a bone. I didn't ask you to ask me to do some side work, some side project work for you. I applied for a job as some sort of staff writer or a politics writer, and you said, no, we don't want to interview, and we don't want to, and certainly don't want to hire you. Don't roofie me and call it romance, is the saying goes in some circles, right? This is bullshit, right? To put it in a simple vernacular, right? If don't act like you're doing me a favor by having me write something for you that probably requires more than $500 worth of work that you're only going to pay me $500 for, and then you realize it's more than $500 worth of work, and just say no. And then on the other hand, here are me and a whole host of other people applying for staff positions that ultimately we were never going to be interviewed for in the first place, because ultimately you just decided to hire a name. And don't get me wrong, it's a good name to hire. But, at the same time, you're just kind of like, none of this is fair. All of this is, in some ways, discriminatory. Now, you can't discriminate, there's no such thing as discrimination on the basis of elitism, right? But there's always hidden stuff around that, around, there's that process really fair? Of course it's not. Heck no, it's not fair, right? It's not fair and it's not right. And I'm not particularly wounded by her being hired for this position. I didn't, because I already knew. The only thing you can do is continue to throw your hat in the ring and continue to do the quality work that I try to do, right? And if ultimately no one wants to interview me for said job because I have gray hair, or because I look the way I do, or because I sound the way I do, or because I haven't been to the last 20 cocktail parties or whatnot. That's not really something I can do anything about, right? So, and it's a terrible fate that affects all of us who are middle aged or even approaching middle age, because who knew that being my age, with my level of experience, with having a relatively late in life renaissance as a writer and a journalist, meant that I couldn't be considered for any positions, because we really want people to be between the ages of basically 33 and 45. Who knew that does that even make any sense? So that's all I've got to say. I know it's a bit of a rant, and I'm ranting about the preamble on the one hand, and all of their whiteness, and second wave, bare minimum second wave feminism at that, right, on the one hand, and this old boys slash elite persons network on the other, that you advertise a job and it seems like a fair process, but there's no way that's a fair process when you hire a name, right? There's just no way it's a fair process. Why even advertise the job? So on the other hand, so it is a rant, but it's a rant that I think all of you can understand. All of you can understand how you go into a job search, and you apply for jobs that you're qualified for, you can do, you've actually done on some level, right? And yet, nope, we don't want to interview. Heck, we don't want to interview anybody in the case of The Guardian. Or you don't get interviewed on the other hand, and they're like, oh, we don't have any black writers really, so let's bring this black dude in and see what he can do on some topic that really is more encyclopedic than actual just what he actually normally does as a writer, right? And so it's just kind of like there's all kinds of wrong here, all kinds of wrong. It's all kinds of wrong.